The Viking Age dawned in the 9th century, with ships cutting through the North Atlantic's iron-gray waves. At the heart of their voyages lay an intimate dance between human ingenuity and nature's guidance. Crews navigated without maps or compasses, relying instead on sunstones, translucent calcite crystals that filtered polarized light to reveal the sun's position even through dense clouds. By rotating these stones until their facets glowed uniformly, sailors charted courses toward uncharted horizons. Migratory birds became living compasses. Arctic terns, flying from Greenland's icy shores to Africa each year, dipped toward land at dusk, their paths memorized over generations. Puffins circling rocky outcrops signaled nearby islands rich with eggs and fresh water. Whales, too, served as guides. When a pilot whale breached the surface, its spray glittering like shattered glass, the crew knew shallow waters lay ahead, a promise of land. These methods, documented in sagas like the Landnámabók, transformed the unknown into the known. Explorers venturing west faced Iceland's volcanic coasts. Steam hissed from geothermal vents, and glaciers loomed over black sand beaches. Early settlers anchored in sheltered fjords, their longships dwarfed by basalt cliffs. They noted landmarks, a smoking fissure, a towering waterfall, a lagoon where seals basked on ice floes. Survival demanded adaptation. Barley seeds, carried from Norway, were sown in ash-enriched soil, while preserved fish and cured meats sustained them through winter's endless nights. The settlement process was communal. Crews claimed valleys through symbolic acts, raising a carved post, stacking stones into boundary markers. Disputes flared over prime grazing land or fishing rights, resolved later at seasonal assemblies called things. These gatherings, held on windswept plains, blended Norse legal traditions with the realities of a new frontier. Oral laws, recited from memory, dictated penalties for theft or violence, ensuring order in a land without kings. Trade sustained these fledgling colonies. Ships returned to Norway laden with Icelandic falcons, prized by European nobility, and walrus ivory destined for Baghdad's workshops. In exchange, settlers received iron tools, glass beads, and grain. Silver dirhams from the Islamic world, etched with Kufic script, circulated alongside Norse arm rings, their weight standardizing value in a moneyless economy. The sea remained both ally and adversary. Storms capsized ships, scattering cargo across the waves. Crews bailed water with leather buckets, muscles burning, while the captain bellowed traditional seafaring chants. Yet for every vessel lost, another returned, its hull creaking with treasures that fueled dreams of further exploration. Iceland's settlement marked a pivot in Viking history. No longer mere raiders, they became colonists, their fate tied to the land's volatile beauty. Hot springs warmed their homes, while geysers served as a reminder of nature's unpredictable forces. Over decades, outposts grew into villages, then trading hubs, their existence a testament to the Norse ability to read wind, water, and stone. This navigational prowess was not born of recklessness but observation. Each voyage honed their understanding of currents, star patterns, and seasonal shifts. Younger crewmen learned from elders, their knowledge passed down like heirlooms. When ravens released from the ship flew west, they continued their natural course, their flight observed as a curious aspect of nature rather than a guide. By the century's end, Iceland's coasts were mapped in sagas and memories. The lessons learned there, how to navigate fire and ice, how to forge order from wilderness, would propel explorers further west, to Greenland's frozen edges and beyond. The Viking Age, once confined to Scandinavia's fjords, now stretched across oceans, its reach limited only by the horizon. The Viking longship was a triumph of engineering, a vessel born from Scandinavia's forests and forged by generations of maritime wisdom. Shipbuilders in Norway's fjords selected oak trees with trunks curved by coastal winds, shaping them into overlapping planks that flexed with the sea's fury. Iron rivets, hammered hot into the wood, bound the hull in a clinker-built pattern, creating a lightweight yet resilient frame. The keel, carved from a single timber, stretched like a spine beneath the ship, stabilizing it against North Atlantic swells. At the prow, craftsmen carved intricate dragon motifs with coiled forms and expressive eyes, designed to evoke maritime tradition and the power of nature. These ships were marvels of versatility. A shallow draft allowed navigation of rivers as narrow as a spear's length, while their symmetrical design let crews reverse direction swiftly, a tactical boon during raids. The Oseberg ship, buried in a Norwegian mound as a grave for a noblewoman, reveals intricate carvings of serpentine forms and cultural symbols, its oak planks still bearing tool marks from 9th century axes. Crews of 30 men rowed in unison, their oars slicing the water to the rhythm of traditional seafaring chants. Sails woven from sheep's wool, stiffened with horsehide grease, billowed in the wind, propelling the ship at speeds unmatched in medieval Europe. Life aboard was a test of endurance. Men slept beneath woolen cloaks on deck, wedged between barrels of sour milk and fermented shark meat. Young crewmen, tasked with bailing water during storms, blistered their hands on leather buckets. The ship's cook, a grizzled veteran of 100 voyages, prepared meals over a stone hearth, barley porridge sweetened with wild honey, or dried cod softened in seawater. At dusk, repairs began. Tar boiled from pine resin sealed cracks in the hull, while nettle fibers stitched torn sails. Every splinter and frayed rope was a lesson in survival, a reminder that the sea spared only the vigilant. Longships enabled the Vikings' dual identity as traders and raiders. In spring, crews laden with Baltic amber and Norse woolen cloth sailed to Sami camps in the north, trading for reindeer pelts and iron ore. By summer, the same ships descended on undefended monasteries like Lindisfarne, their prows glinting in the dawn light. Plunder, silver chalices, silk vestments, and captives taken during raids were hauled aboard, destined for markets in Dublin or Hedeby. The ship's holds became microcosms of the medieval world. Frankish swords beside Arab silver dirhams, Byzantine glassware stacked atop Irish wool. The longship's design evolved with each voyage. Shipwrights in Denmark experimented with taller masts and wider beams, creating vessels capable of crossing open oceans to Iceland and Greenland. In Iceland's treeless valleys, settlers repurposed wrecked ships into roof beams, their curved hulls framing turf-walled longhouses. Even in death, the ships served. Chieftains were interred within them, their bodies accompanied by weapons and tools as part of their final rites. This engineering legacy endured long after the Viking Age. The Nar, a broader cargo ship, later carried settlers and livestock to Greenland's frozen shores. Hanseatic cogs of the 12th century borrowed the clinker-built technique, while the longship spirit lived on in the explorers who crossed oceans with little more than stars and stubbornness. To sail a Viking ship was to master chaos, to bend wind and wave into a path toward destiny. The Viking economy thrived on a delicate balance between trade and raid, a duality shaped by Scandinavia's harsh winters and scarce resources. Each spring, as ice retreated from fjords, crews loaded longships with goods painstakingly gathered over months. Amber, polished to a golden gleam on Norway's beaches, lay nestled beside walrus tusks harvested from Greenland's icy coasts. Iron ore, smelted from peat bogs in Denmark, was forged into axes and nails, while woolen cloth, woven by Norse women, coarse yet durable, was folded into tight bales. These cargoes sailed east to the Baltic, where Sami traders exchanged reindeer pelts and Arctic fox furs, their value measured in silver rings worn on the arms of chieftains. By midsummer, the same ships transformed into instruments of plunder. The monastery at Lindisfarne, undefended and ripe with wealth, fell in the late 8th century to a fleet of dragon-proud longships. Monks chronicled the horror, warriors wading ashore, their axes breaking into buildings to seize valuable items and religious artifacts. Silk vestments, smuggled from Byzantium, were stripped from reliquaries, while scribes versed in Latin were shackled for sale in Dublin's slave markets. Raids were not acts of mindless violence, but calculated ventures, timed to coincide with Christian feast days when defenses lapsed. Silver became the lifeblood of Viking trade. Arabic dirhams, some bearing inscriptions from the Islamic world in Kufic script, traveled north via Russian river routes, a testament to the far-reaching influence of early Muslim civilizations. In Iceland's fledgling settlements, these coins were hacked into pieces, their weight tested on brass scales to buy timber or livestock. Hoards buried in Swedish soil, a mix of Frankish deniers, Anglo-Saxon pennies, and Islamic silver, reveal a network spanning continents. Even in death, wealth signified status. Chieftains were buried with scales and weights, symbols of their worldly influence. Yet trade demanded diplomacy. In Novgorod's bustling markets, Norse merchants bargained with Khazar middlemen, offering tin and honey for Slavic amber and Persian spices. Language barriers were bridged by hand gestures and the clink of silver. At thing assemblies, disputes over stolen goods or breached contracts were settled through oath-swearing and fines paid in cattle or cloth. These gatherings, held on windswept plains, wove Norse pragmatism into a fledgling legal system, one that prioritized restitution over vengeance. Colonies like Dublin and Hedeby emerged as hubs of exchange. In Dublin's narrow lanes, Gaelic wool was dyed crimson with lichen and traded for Frankish wine. Hedeby's docks groaned under the weight of German millstones and Frisian wool, while smiths hammered rivets for ships bound to Iceland. The Vikings' reputation as raiders often overshadowed their role as facilitators of commerce, their ships stitching together a patchwork of cultures from the Caspian Sea to the North Atlantic. Winter tested the limits of this economy. Stores of grain, dried fish, and smoked meat determined survival. In Iceland's volcanic valleys, settlers bartered walrus ivory for barley seed, while Greenland's Norse relied on sealskin boots and blubber lamp oil traded from Inuit hunters. Failures were etched in bone. Skeletal remains in Greenland show stunted growth, a testament to malnutrition when trade routes froze. The legacy of this system endured long after the Viking Age. Hanseatic merchants of the 12th century adopted Norse trade practices, while Icelandic law codes influenced medieval guild regulations. Silver hoards, buried in fear of raids, now lie in museums, their coins silent witnesses to an era when a ship's hold could hold the world. The settlement of Iceland in the 9th century marked a pivotal chapter in Viking history, a testament to human resilience against a landscape of fire and ice. Explorers drawn westward by tales of unclaimed land faced a world unlike Scandinavia's fjords. Volcanic plains stretched under ash-gray skies, geysers erupting with sulfurous steam, and glaciers creeping like frozen rivers toward the sea. Longships anchored in sheltered fjords, their crews hauling tools, livestock, and saplings ashore, a fragile cargo of survival. Turf-walled longhouses rose from the earth, their roofs layered with birch bark and sod to trap warmth. Timber, scarce in Iceland's treeless valleys, was salvaged from shipwrecks or traded for walrus ivory with Norwegian merchants. Inside, smoke from hearth fires curled through roof vents, blackening rafters as families huddled around stone-lined pits. Barley, sown in soil enriched by volcanic ash, struggled to ripen under the midnight sun. Settlers supplemented meager harvests with dried cod, seaweed, and the fermented shark meat that staved off starvation during winter's darkness. Disputes over land flared quickly. A crew claiming a valley might find rivals arriving weeks later, their own prow stones marking the same stream. To prevent bloodshed, settlers gathered at thing assemblies, open-air courts where laws were recited from memory. At Thingvellir, a rift valley straddling tectonic plates, the Alþingi Parliament convened annually. Chieftains, clad in woolen cloaks pinned with silver brooches, debated grazing rights and fines for theft. Witnesses swore oaths on iron rings, their words binding under the gaze of the community. Women played a vital role in this frontier society. They spun wool into vothmal, a durable cloth that became Iceland's currency, and brewed ale from heather and bog myrtle. When men embarked on summer raids, women managed farms, tending to sheep and preserving food. Grave goods reveal their influence. Iron keys, symbolizing household authority, bronze scales for weighing silver, and glass beads from the Rhineland, traded across seas they would never sail. The environment dictated survival. Volcanic eruptions, like the catastrophic Elja fissure eruption in the 10th century, poisoned skies and starved livestock. Settlers adapted, carving runes with desperate hopes. Sun, grow bright again. Earth, bear green once more. In Greenland's colonies, founded later, the challenges multiplied. Icebergs calved into fjords, and Norse farmers clashed with Inuit hunters over sealing grounds. Yet they endured for centuries, their bones and tools buried under permafrost as silent witnesses to tenacity. Trade sustained these outposts. Icelandic falcons, trained to hunt, were prized by European nobility and exchanged for grain and iron. Walrus ivory, carved into chess pieces and reliquaries, reached as far as Cairo and Constantinople. Even in death, the connection to homeland persisted. Settlers buried in Greenland wore woolens dyed with Icelandic lichen. Burials in Greenland often reflected Norse cultural traditions, with graves sometimes oriented eastward as a gesture of remembrance. The legacy of Norse colonization lingers in language and law. Icelandic sagas, penned centuries later, immortalized explorers who sailed beyond the edge of the world. Place names: Reykjavik's Smoky Bay, Hekla's Gateway to Hell, echo the settlers' awe and dread. The Alti-Ingi's traditions of debate and restitution influenced modern democracies, while DNA studies reveal Iceland's population remains a living snapshot of Viking Age Scandinavia. This chapter of expansion was not without cost. Forests felled for fuel and shipbuilding never regrew, leaving Iceland's soil vulnerable to erosion. In Greenland, climate shifts and isolation extinguished colonies by the 15th century. Yet the settlers' greatest lesson endures, that human ambition, when tempered by communal bonds and adaptability, can thrive even where fire meets ice. The Norse expansion reached its zenith with voyages to Greenland and Vinland, territories that tested the limits of Viking endurance and ambition. In the late 10th century, explorers departing Iceland followed the migratory paths of seabirds northwest, their longships laden with iron tools, livestock, and saplings. Greenland's icy coasts emerged first, fjords choked with icebergs, their blue-white facets glinting under the midnight sun. Settlers established farms in sheltered valleys, their turf longhouses mirrored against snow-draped mountains. Yet Greenland's beauty masked peril. Winters brought blizzards that buried homes under drifts, while summers offered scant weeks to harvest barley or hay. Survival hinged on sealing and walrus hunting, their meat and oil traded for Norwegian timber and iron. Vinland, glimpsed beyond Greenland's horizon, became the next frontier. Sagas recount a land of wild grapes and towering forests, likely Newfoundland's northern tip. In the early 11th century, crews anchored at Las O Meadows, a sheltered bay where butternuts and bog iron lay abundant. Temporary shelters rose, wooden huts with sod roofs, forge pits for smelting ore, and boat repair stations. Explorers marveled at the unfamiliar. Salmon teeming in rivers, vast stands of spruce ideal for shipbuilding, and winters milder than Iceland's. Yet this promise soon clashed with reality. Skirmishes erupted with indigenous scrowlings, likely ancestors of the Beothuk or Mi'kmaq. Sagas describe tense exchanges. Norse red cloth traded for furs, misunderstandings over goods, and resulting conflict. The Norse retreat from Vinland was swift but strategic. Though timber-rich, the land lacked stable trade routes and safe harbors for permanent colonies. Crews returned to Greenland with holds full of lumber, maple sap, and tales of a distant shore. Las O Meadows became a seasonal camp, abandoned within decades, but immortalized in sagas as proof of transatlantic travel centuries before Columbus. Greenland's colonies endured longer, sustained by adaptation. Norse farmers adopted Inuit hunting techniques, crafting toggle harpoons to hunt seals and walruses. Women spun wool into sails for European markets, while traders bartered walrus ivory for church bells and stained glass. Yet isolation took its toll. The Little Ice Age of the 14th century expanded glaciers, swallowing pastures and sealing off supply routes. By the 15th century, the last Norse settlements vanished, their ruins buried under permafrost. Archaeology reveals the scope of these ventures. At Lance O Meadows, a bronze cloak pin and iron rivets attest to Norse presence. Greenland's graves hold skeletons with signs of scurvy and malnutrition, their woolen tunics patched with sealskin. Inuit oral histories speak of pale strangers who traded metal but feared the land's spirits. These fragments, scattered across continents, weave a narrative of ambition and fragility. The Vinland voyages underscored Norse mastery of seamanship, but also their limits. Without alliances or sustained supply lines, even fertile lands remained beyond reach, yet their legacy endured. The Nar, a sturdy cargo ship developed for Atlantic crossings, became the backbone of medieval European trade. Norse navigational techniques, reading stars, waves, and wildlife, laid groundwork for later explorers. In Iceland, sagas like the Greenlandinga saga preserved Vinland's memory, blending history with myth. Centuries later, Danish scholars scoured these texts to validate Norse claims to the New World. Today, reconstructions of Viking ships sail from Norway to Newfoundland, retracing routes etched in runestones and oral lore. The Greenland and Vinland ventures were not failures but experiments. They revealed the Norse capacity to adapt to icy coasts, motion peoples, and ecological shifts, and the precariousness of expansion in an age without maps or mercy. What they left behind were not just ruins, but a question. How far can courage and curiosity carry a people when the world itself is the greatest adversary? Viking society thrived on a framework of laws and communal governance that balanced individual freedoms with collective responsibility. At its core lay the Thing assemblies, gatherings where free men resolved disputes, ratified laws, and elected leaders. These assemblies, held in open-air spaces like Iceland's Ingvellir or Norway's Gulating, were the bedrock of Norse democracy. Laws, passed down orally by law speakers, dictated everything from property rights to penalties for theft. A crime against one was seen as a crime against the community, with fines paid in silver or livestock to restore harmony rather than exact vengeance. Social hierarchy shaped daily life. At the top were jarls, wealthy landowners who commanded fleets and hosted feasts in mead halls. Beneath them were carls, free farmers, and craftsmen who formed the backbone of Viking society. At the lowest rung were thralls, enslaved captives from raids, though their children could earn freedom through service. Women, though excluded from assemblies, wielded influence as managers of estates, traders, and custodians of family honor. Grave goods, keys, looms, and scales buried with them attest to their authority in domestic and economic spheres. Legal codes reflected pragmatism. In Norway's frost-laden law, sailors were fined for neglecting ship repairs, while Iceland's Graga statutes required neighbors to assist in haymaking. Oath-taking, sworn on iron rings or sacred stones, binding agreements were enforced through social norms and public witness, reflecting the seriousness with which justice was upheld. Witnesses corroborated claims, and false testimony risked outlawry, a sentence stripping one of legal protection, forcing exile or death. These systems prioritized stability in a world where survival depended on trust. The transition from oral to written law marked a turning point. By the 12th century, Icelandic scribes transcribed laws onto calfskin manuscripts, preserving traditions like blood feuds mitigated by compensation, Wurgil. Runestones in Sweden recorded legal decisions, with inscriptions declaring, "This stone stands as a witness to the judgment of the thing." These texts influenced medieval Scandinavian law codes, blending Norse customs with Christian ethics after conversion. Archaeology reveals the reach of Viking governance. At Borgund in Norway, a Thing site features rows of stone seats where chieftains once deliberated. In Denmark, runestones near Jelling commemorate King Harald Bluetooth's unification of tribes under one law. The Leges Henrici Primi An English legal text echoes Norse principles of restitution, a legacy of Danelaw rule. This legal ingenuity sustained Viking expansion. Traders in foreign ports invoked Norse contracts, knowing their kin enforced them. Colonists in Iceland and Greenland replicated assembly systems, adapting laws to new environments. Even in decline, the Thing's spirit endured. Medieval Iceland's Alþingi is among the oldest surviving parliaments, a direct descendant of Viking pragmatism. The true measure of Viking law lay not in its severity but its flexibility. It bound fjord farmers, Atlantic explorers, and Baltic merchants into a cohesive identity, proving that order could flourish without emperors or cathedrals. In runes and rulings, they carved a legacy where justice was spoken aloud under open skies by those it served. Daily life in Viking Age Scandinavia revolved around seasonal rhythms, communal labor, and the mastery of crafts essential for survival. In Norway's fjords or Iceland's valleys, families rose at dawn to tend crops, herds, and workshops. Longhouses, their walls of turf and timber, hummed with activity. Women carding wool for Vatmal cloth, men forging iron tools in hearthside forges, children gathering dung for fuel. Smoke seeped through roof vents, mingling with the tang of salted fish drying on racks. Farming anchored Viking society. Barley and rye grew in small plots fertilized with seaweed and ash, while sheep grazed on mountain slopes. Autumn's harvest dictated winter survival. Grain stored in underground pits, meat smoked over alderwood fires, and berries preserved in honey. In Greenland, where frost gripped the soil, settlers relied on seal blubber and caribou meat, their diets adapted to a land that demanded resilience. Craftsmanship transformed raw materials into lifelines. Blacksmiths heated bog iron in clay furnaces, hammering it into plowshares, nails, and sword blades. Woodworkers carved bowls from birch, shaped oars from ash, and hollowed out log boats for fishing. Women spun wool on drop spindles, weaving cloaks dyed with lichen purple or woad blue. Even children contributed, braiding rope from horsehair or molding clay into spindle whorls. Trade wove these households into a wider world. At local cowpangs, markets, farmers bartered butter for soapstone pots or traded amber for glass beads. Peddlers carried news of Frankish swords in Hedeby, Arab silver in Burka, or walrus ivory bound for Constantinople. In Iceland's Thing assemblies, a farmer might swap a barrel of dried cod for a forged axe, his wealth measured not in coins but utility. Social bonds were forged in mead halls. At winter feasts, chieftains hosted lavish gatherings beneath tapestries depicting legendary figures and ancestors. Roasted boar, rye bread, and honeyed ale-filled trestle tables, while skalds recited sagas of ancestral glory. These feasts were more than revelry. They cemented alliances, settled disputes, and redistributed wealth through gift-giving. A well-crafted sword or arm ring could buy loyalty for generations. Clothing reflected status and practicality. Men wore tunics of wool or linen, belted with leather, and trousers reinforced with patches. Women layered ankle-length dresses under aprons fastened by brooches. Both genders wrapped woolen cloaks in winter, pinned with iron or bronze. Footwear, calfskin boots or sealskin shoes, showed regional adaptations, stitched with sinew for durability. Pagan-era spiritual customs, such as wearing symbolic charms for protection, influenced aspects of daily life before the region adopted Christianity. These are described here solely as part of the historical record, and seasonal celebrations rooted in pre-Christian Norse belief systems marked key points in the agricultural calendar. Yet these customs coexisted with practicality. A fisherman might hope for a good catch, but ultimately relied on his nets and knowledge of the tides. Archaeology unveils intimate details. At York's Coppergate site, combs carved from antler reveal grooming rituals, while Oseberg's burial ship contains sledges, tapestries, and even a peacock feather from distant lands. These artifacts whisper of lives balancing tradition and innovation, where every tool and garment bore the marks of hands striving against nature's indifference. The Viking Age's end did not erase these rhythms. Medieval Scandinavian farmers still sowed barley in spring, smiths hammered iron, and weavers threaded looms. What faded was the longship's shadow, the raids and explorations that once stretched their world from Vinland to the Volga. Yet, in quiet acts, mending a fence, brewing ale, teaching a child to carve, the legacy of 1,000 ordinary lives endured. The Vikings' cultural legacy endured long after their longships ceased to dominate the seas, etched into art, language, and the land itself. Runes, angular symbols carved into stone, wood, and metal, served as both practical tools and memorials. In Sweden's upland region, runestones commemorated fallen warriors, their inscriptions declaring, "He journeyed west with Ingvar, brave in battle." Merchants used runic tags to label goods, while lovers exchanged cryptic messages on birch bark. These symbols, rooted in Germanic traditions, evolved regionally. Danish runes simplified for efficiency, while Norwegian variants retained ornate flourishes. Sagas, oral histories later transcribed on calfskin, bridged myth and memory. Icelandic texts like Njál's saga and Egil's saga preserved stories from Norse society, recounting family disputes, social customs, and the challenges faced by historical figures, blending cultural memory with elements of fiction and oral tradition. These narratives, though embellished, preserved societal norms, honor codes, legal precedents, and the consequences of ambition. Skalds, court poets, recited verses in mead halls, their alliterative rhythms echoing the crash of oars. Over time, Christian scribes reinterpreted these traditions, setting aside pagan elements in favor of recording history through the perspective of monastic scholarship. Artistic expression flourished in metal and wood. Bore-style brooches intertwined serpentine beasts, their eyes gleaming with garnet inlays. The Oseberg ship's prow swirled with gripping beasts, a motif symbolizing chaos tamed by craft. By the 10th century, the gelling stone, erected during the region's shift from paganism to Christianity, displayed symbols from both traditions as part of a cultural and political transition. Even functional items, a fishing hook, a spindle whorl, bore geometric designs, transforming daily tools into works of reverence for nature's order. Archaeology unearths this legacy. At Birka, Sweden's bustling trade hub, excavations revealed glass beads from Egypt, silk fragments from Byzantium, and a bronze Buddha statuette from India. The Gokstad ship, buried in a Norwegian mound, held gaming pieces and sledges, reflecting a leader's status in life and death. In York's Coppergate, leather shoes and amber pins illustrated urban Viking life, far removed from raiders' stereotypes. Language carried Viking influence across centuries. Old Norse birthed words like sky, egg, and law in English, while place names, York's Jorvik, Normandy's Rouen, marked their territorial footprint. Genetic studies trace Viking DNA through coastal Britain, Ireland, and beyond, their descendants numbering in the millions today. Christianity's spread reshaped but did not erase Viking identity. Runestones in Denmark's Jelling proclaimed Harald Bluetooth's conversion, yet retained traditional Norse iconography. Stave churches in Norway. Stave churches often retain decorative elements from earlier Norse art styles, reflecting the gradual cultural, not spiritual, shift from paganism to Christianity. By the 12th century, Norse kings like Norway's Sigurd the Crusader wielded both Bible and axe, their piety layered over ancestral pragmatism. The Viking Age's end came not with defeat, but integration. Hanseatic traders adopted Norse ship designs, while Icelandic historical accounts, later written as sagas, influenced medieval chroniclers. Explorers like Leif Erikson faded into legend, only to re-emerge in modern nationalism as symbols of resilience. Today, replicas of longships sail from Roskilde to Newfoundland, their crews testing ancient navigation methods. Museums display reconstructed helmets, never horned despite myth, their dull iron reflecting firelight as they once did in communal halls where stories and songs were shared. Scholarly debates dissect sagas for historical kernels, while festivals reenact thing assemblies, their verdicts now theatrical yet resonant. The Vikings' true legacy lies not in plunder, but adaptation. They carved order from wilderness, threaded continents with trade, and etched their story into stone, sea, and memory. In runes, relics, and the roll of waves, their world endures, a testament to a culture that thrived where earth, fire, and ice converged. The Viking Age did not end abruptly, but faded into history, eroded by political consolidation, religious transformation, and shifting trade dynamics. By the 11th century, Scandinavian kings consolidated power, replacing fragmented chiefdoms with centralized rule. In Norway, Olaf II harnessed Christianity to unify factions, enforcing religious conversion along the coast, often under the threat of war. His reign mirrored trends in Denmark and Sweden, where monarchs allied with the church to legitimize authority, eroding the cultural hold of ancient traditions. The once fluid identity of raider-trader blurred into feudal obligations, with warriors pledging loyalty to crowns rather than chieftains. Christianization reshaped societal norms. Missionaries from England and Germany dismantled pagan temples, constructing churches where pagan shrines once stood. Runestones in Denmark's Jelling complex, commissioned by Harold Bluetooth, documented the king's shift to Christianity, alongside declarations of territorial conquest, alongside boasts of territorial conquest. Yet, elements of cultural mixing remained evident. Traditional Norse symbols were combined with Christian emblems, and winter solstice customs blended with later festive celebrations. The Alþingi, Iceland's assembly, chose to align with Christian kingdoms for diplomatic and trade benefits in the year 1000, a pragmatic choice to avoid trade embargoes from Europe's Christian kingdoms. Internal conflicts hastened decline. Power struggles between emerging monarchs and regional jarls erupted into civil wars, draining resources once spent on exploration. The Battle of Stamford Bridge in the year 1066 marked a symbolic end, a Norwegian king's defeat in England, his army decimated by Anglo-Saxon forces. Meanwhile, the Hanseatic League's rise redirected Baltic trade away from Norse hubs like Birka and Hedeby. German merchants in Lübeck and Riga monopolized grain, fur, and timber, sidelining Viking middlemen. Economic foundations crumbled. Silver from Islamic mines dwindled as Mongol invasions disrupted Eurasian trade routes. Greenland's colonies, isolated by ice and silence, vanished by the 15th century, their final days marked by malnourished skeletons and Inuit tales of ghosts in crumbling houses. Iceland's once lucrative falcon trade collapsed as European nobles turned to Mediterranean suppliers. Even the iconic longship grew obsolete, outpaced by deeper-hulled cogs designed for bulk cargo. Cultural identity fragmented. Norse dialects diverged into Swedish, Danish, and Norwegian, while Latin script supplanted runes in official records. Sagas, once oral epics, were penned by monks who scrubbed them of pagan excess. The Varangian Guard, Norse mercenaries serving Byzantine emperors, became relics of a bygone era, their axes now ceremonial, their loyalties bought with gold, not glory. Yet remnants endured. Legal traditions from the Alþingi influenced Scandinavian civil codes, while Viking ship designs inspired Hanseatic traders. In remote valleys, farmers recited old sayings during storms, and blacksmiths etched symbols into tools as a tradition. The Rus, descendants of Swedish Vikings, forged what would become Russia, their legacy etched in Kiev's foundations and the very word Russia itself. Archaeology captures this twilight. Hoards buried in the 11th century contain fewer Arab coins and more German pennies, reflecting shifting alliances. Graves shifted from traditional burial goods to items reflecting the new Christian influence. The Oseberg ship, once a symbol of the pre-Christian era's craftsmanship and seafaring tradition, lay forgotten until its rediscovery in 1904, a time capsule of a fading world. The Viking Age's close was not a defeat but an evolution. Raiders became traders, then kings, then memory. Their ships rotted in fjords, and their older traditions faded into folklore over time. But their imprint lingered in laws, languages, and the restless ambition that would propel later Europeans across oceans they first dared to cross. The Viking Age lives on not in sagas alone, but in the soil, where artifacts whisper tales of exploration, trade, and daily struggle. Archaeologists sifting through Scandinavian peat bogs and Newfoundland shores have unearthed a world suspended between myth and history. The Oseberg ship, buried in Norway's Vestfold region in the 9th century, emerged in 1904 with its dragon prow intact, alongside sledges, tapestries, and the skeletons of two women, a queen and her servant, perhaps of high status. Though their roles remain debated, their identities remain debated, but their grave goods reveal a society valuing artistry and mobility. Hoards of silver, buried hastily, whether out of fear or to protect valuables, map Viking trade routes. The Quairdale hoard, discovered in England's River Ribble, held over 8,000 coins, Arabic dirhams, Frankish deniers, and hack silver from Ireland, all scattered during a failed escape. In Gotland's fields, arm rings and brooches lay entwined, their owners lost to time. These caches, often unearthed by farmers' plows, testify to wealth amassed and suddenly abandoned. Everyday objects humanize the Norse. At York's Coppergate site, leather shoes, combs carved from deer antler, and wooden bowls speak of urban life. A child's toy boat, found in a Danish bog, mirrors the longships that carried fathers to distant shores. In Greenland's frozen middens, discarded fish bones and broken needles reveal colonist desperation as the climate cooled. Even lice combs, etched with runic charms, hint at the universal itch of existence. Runestones bridge past and present. Sweden's Rockstone, inscribed in the 9th century, weaves cryptic verses recounting legendary ancestors and symbolic struggles. Denmark's Jelling stones, raised by Harold Bluetooth, displayed both Christian and older cultural symbols, reflecting a transitional period, a king's bid to reconcile old and new faiths. These stones, once vibrant with red paint, now stand weathered but legible, their runes a script for the curious. Ships themselves are time capsules. The Gokstad ship, excavated in Norway in 1880, carried 64 shields, a gaming board, and the remains of a man buried with peacocks, an exotic marker of wealth brought from the east. Replicas like the Sea Stallion have sailed from Roskilde to Dublin, proving Viking engineering's enduring seaworthiness. These voyages, blending ancient craft with modern curiosity, honor the original explorer's audacity. Technology reshapes understanding. Ground-penetrating radar reveals buried halls in Iceland's valleys, while isotopic analysis of teeth traces individuals' migrations from Norway to England. DNA studies confirm Viking presence in places like Orkney, where Norse genes mingle with Pictish bloodlines. Even the Lewis chessmen, carved from walrus ivory in the 12th century, now undergo 3D scanning, their enigmatic smiles digitized for posterity. The Vikings' environmental footprint lingers. Pollen samples from Greenland show Norse deforestation for pasture, accelerating soil erosion. In Iceland, volcanic ash layers date settlements precisely, while cod bones in Hedeby's trash pits track shifting fishing grounds as the climate cooled. These silent witnesses remind us that the Viking Age was not just human history, but an ecological chapter. Museums and modern culture keep their legacy alive. Oslo's Viking Ship Museum draws millions to gaze at Oseberg's serpentine curves, while York's Jorvik Center immerses visitors in reconstructed streets reeking of tar and dung. Festivals reenact thing assemblies, their verdicts delivered with mock solemnity, and craftsmen forge replica swords, their blades unbloodied but gleaming. Yet the greatest discoveries may lie ahead. Melting glaciers in Norway expose leather shoes and hunting tools, preserved for a millennium. Underwater drones scour Baltic shipwrecks, their holds untouched by time. Each artifact, whether a king's sword or a child's rattle, adds a pixel to the vast mosaic of the Viking world, a world that dared to sail beyond the edge of the known, navigated using stars, landmarks, and inherited knowledge. In the end, archaeology does not merely unearth the past. It resurrects the hopes, fears, and hands that shaped it, proving that even a broken comb or a rusted rivet can outlast empires. The Vikings, once dismissed as brutes, now speak through the soil, a reminder that history is not written by the victorious alone, but by the soil that preserves human stories through time.